Jake Morrison wiped the sweat from his forehead and stared at the rows of supply crates in the warehouse. The air conditioning had broken down again and the temperature inside felt like an oven. He marked another box on his digital clipboard and sighed. This was not what he imagined when he joined the Colonial Defense Force 5 years ago. New Haven Colony was supposed to be a fresh start for humanity on Kepler 442d, but reality had been much harder than the recruitment videos promised. The mining operations barely broke even, equipment constantly failed in the harsh environment, and supply shipments from Earth arrived months late. Jake spent most of his days counting rations and filing reports that nobody on Earth seemed to read. He reached into his pocket and felt the chocolate bar his sister Katie had sent in the last care package. It was a real luxury out here where most food came in the form of nutritional paste and dried protein blocks. Jake had been saving it for a special occasion, though he could not imagine what that might be in a place like this. The alarm siren suddenly screamed to life, making Jake drop his clipboard. Red lights flashed throughout the warehouse as the emergency broadcast system crackled to life. An unidentified spacecraft had crashed 3 kilometers outside the colony perimeter. All military personnel were ordered to report to their stations immediately. Jake ran toward the command center, his heart pounding. In 3 years on Kepler 442, they had never detected any alien presence. The planet was supposed to be empty, just another rock with decent minerals and breathable air. As he burst through the command center doors, he found Colonel Patricia Hayes organizing rescue teams. The colonel looked up at Jake and nodded. She knew he would want to go. Jake grabbed a medical kit and emergency supplies, then climbed into one of the colony's rough terrain vehicles with 5 other soldiers. The drive across the red sand desert felt like it took forever, even though they were moving at top speed. When they arrived at the crash site, Jake saw a small escape pod half buried in the sand. It was unlike anything he had seen before. The metal seemed to shimmer with strange colors and symbols he could not read covered its surface. The rescue team approached carefully, weapons ready, not knowing what they would find inside. Sergeant Henry Blake used a cutting tool to open the pod's damaged hatch. Inside, they found a small figure curled up on the floor. It was a child, but clearly not human. Her skin was pale blue, almost like ice, and her eyes were large and violet. She wore torn clothing that might have been elegant once, but was now stained and burned. The girl was unconscious and barely breathing. The team's medic, Corporal Danny Chen, quickly checked her vital signs. Her biology was different from humans, but she clearly needed immediate help. They carefully lifted her from the pod and placed her on a stretcher. As they prepared to move her to the vehicle, her eyes suddenly opened. The girl looked around in panic, trying to sit up despite her weakness. She made sounds that might have been words, but Jake could not understand the language. Her eyes were filled with terror as she stared at the humans surrounding her. She tried to push herself away from them, her thin arms shaking with the effort. Jake knelt down slowly, keeping his movements gentle and non-threatening. He held up his empty hands to show he meant no harm. The girl watched him closely, her breathing fast and shallow. Jake noticed how thin she was. Her cheeks were hollow and her arms looked like they had not seen proper food in weeks or maybe months. Without thinking, Jake reached into his pocket and pulled out the chocolate bar. He unwrapped it slowly, the familiar brown square catching the afternoon light. The girl's violet eyes fixed on the chocolate immediately. She stared at it with an intensity that made Jake's heart ache. This was not just hunger. This was desperation. Jake broke off a piece and held it out to her. The girl hesitated, looking between Jake's face and the chocolate. Her hand trembled as she slowly reached out and took the piece. She brought it to her mouth carefully, as if she could not believe it was real. The moment she tasted it, tears began streaming down her blue cheeks. She ate the chocolate slowly, savoring every small bite. Jake gave her the rest of the bar, and she accepted it with both hands, holding it like it was the most precious thing in the universe. When she finished, she looked at Jake and tried to smile through her tears. It was a weak smile, but it was genuine. The girl allowed them to lift her onto the stretcher after that. She kept her eyes on Jake during the entire ride back to the colony, as if he was the only anchor she had in this strange new world. Danny worked on stabilizing her condition while Jake sat nearby, wondering what terrible circumstances had brought this child to their remote planet. At the colony's medical center, the doctors were amazed and confused. They had never seen this species before, and their medical databases had no information about her biology. They did their best to provide care, using basic principles that seemed to work across different life forms. The girl was severely malnourished and dehydrated, but she would survive. Jake visited her every day while she recovered. He brought simple things like warm blankets, water, and bland food that her system could handle. The colony's artificial intelligence worked constantly to decode her language using recordings from the pod's damaged computer system. Progress was slow, but they were learning. After a week, they managed to learn her name, Vela. She repeated it several times, pointing to herself, making sure they understood. Jake practiced saying it correctly until she nodded with approval. She seemed more comfortable around him than anyone else in the colony, always watching for him when he entered the medical center. The computer technicians finally managed to extract data from the escape pod's black box. What they found changed everything. Vela was not just any refugee. She was a princess from a civilization called the Alien Sovereignty, an empire that controlled hundreds of star systems that humanity had never detected. The data told a horrible story. The alien had been attacked by an enemy called the Krail, described as a machine intelligence that consumed entire civilizations. Vela's homeworld had been destroyed. Her family had been killed. Her mother had placed her in the escape pod in the final moments before their palace fell. Hoping she would survive, the pod had traveled through space for months before its systems finally failed and it crashed on Kepler 442. Vela had survived on emergency rations that had run out weeks before the crash. She had been alone, terrified, and starving in that small pod, watching her supplies disappear day by day with no idea if she would live or die. Colonel Hayes called Jake into her office after the technicians finished their report. She looked tired and worried. Earth's government wanted Vela transferred immediately for questioning. Intelligence services were desperate to learn about this new alien threat. A transport ship would arrive in 2 days to take her away. Jake felt sick. Vela was just beginning to feel safe. Moving her now, taking her away from the one familiar face she trusted, seemed cruel. But he was just a lieutenant. He had no authority to change orders from Earth. All he could do was spend time with her before she left. That evening, Jake sat beside Vela's bed in the medical center. She had been learning English through neural teaching technology, and she could now speak simple sentences. She looked at him with those large violet eyes and spoke in a quiet voice. "Please, no leave you." The grammar was wrong, but the meaning was clear. Jake wanted to promise he would protect her, that he would not let them take her away. But he could not make promises he might not be able to keep. Instead, he just held her small hand and said he would do everything he could. She seemed to understand. She closed her eyes and whispered something in her own language that sounded like a prayer, or maybe a wish. Jake left the medical center late that night and walked through the colony's quiet streets. Above him, the stars seemed brighter than usual. Somewhere out there, an enemy was hunting through space, destroying civilizations, and somehow a small colony of humans had become part of that story because one frightened child had crashed on their world. He thought about the chocolate bar and how such a small thing had created a connection between him and Vela. He wondered if she would remember him after Earth's intelligence services took her away. He wondered if he would ever know what happened to her. Most of all, he wondered if giving her that chocolate had been the right thing to do, or if it had only made saying goodbye harder for both of them. Jake spent the next morning filing formal objections to Vela's transfer. He wrote detailed reports explaining that moving her before she fully recovered could endanger her health. He argued that the colony had established rapport with her, and that disrupting this connection might cause psychological harm. Colonel Hayes supported his efforts, but they both knew it would not matter. Earth's response came quickly and firmly. The transfer was not negotiable. Vela represented humanity's first contact with an advanced alien civilization and proof of an existential threat. Personal comfort had to take second place to strategic necessity. The transport ship would arrive on schedule. Vela's language skills improved rapidly with the neural teaching system. By the afternoon, she could hold simple conversations. Jake sat with her in the medical center, and she began to explain what had happened to her world. She spoke slowly, searching for words, but the story she told was clear enough. The Alien Sovereignty had been a peaceful civilization for thousands of years. They had discovered something called essence, an energy source that allowed them to travel between stars without conventional engines and power technology far beyond human capabilities. They had built beautiful cities, created art and music, and lived in harmony with nature. Then the Krail came. They appeared without warning at the edge of alien space. At first, the alien tried to communicate, to understand what these machines wanted. The Krail responded with violence. They attacked world after world, destroying everything in their path. They wanted the Essence technology, and they would kill anyone who stood in their way. Vela's voice shook when she described the attack on her homeworld. She had been in the palace with her family when the Krail ships appeared in the sky. The defenses held for a while, but there were too many enemy ships. Her mother, the Queen, had made the terrible choice to send Vela away while the rest of the family stayed to coordinate the evacuation of civilians. Jake listened quietly, letting her tell the story at her own pace. When she finished, she looked at him with those violet eyes and said something that confused him. "You gave food when I had nothing. This makes bond, strong bond." He tried to explain that he had just been helping, that anyone would have done the same. She shook her head firmly. "No, this is special. You are special." That evening, the long-range sensors detected something. A massive energy signature was approaching the system at incredible speed. The colony's defense coordinator tried to identify the ships, but their technology was unlike anything in human databases. Colonel Hayes ordered the colony to battle stations, but everyone knew their defenses were minimal. When the ships entered visual range, Jake felt his blood run cold. They were exactly as Vela had described. Geometric shapes of pure black that seemed to absorb light. There were dozens of them, forming patterns in space like a swarm of insects. The Krail had found them. The Krail did not send messages or make demands. They simply began firing on the planet. Energy weapons tore through the atmosphere, striking buildings and infrastructure. The colony's shields held for the first few strikes, but they were never designed for this kind of assault. Colonel Hayes immediately ordered evacuation procedures. Jake ran to the medical center. He found Vela sitting up in bed, staring at the ceiling as explosions rocked the building. She knew what was happening without being told. "They found me," she said quietly. "I am sorry. I brought them here." Jake wanted to reassure her, to tell her this was not her fault, but there was no time. The evacuation was chaos. 12,000 people lived in New Haven, but the colony only had transport capacity for about 4,000. Colonel Hayes made the difficult decisions about who would go first. Children, then essential personnel, then everyone else by lottery. Jake was assigned to help coordinate the evacuation, which meant he should board one of the ships. Vela grabbed his arm as he prepared to leave. She spoke quickly, urgently. "I can help. My pod has beacon. Special beacon using essence. If we activate it, my people will hear. They will come." Jake felt a flash of hope, but Vela's expression was serious. "But Krail will also hear. They will attack harder. It is dangerous." Jake made a decision that went against every regulation in the military handbook. He went to Colonel Hayes and explained Vela's offer. The colonel listened, her face grim. They had maybe 6 hours before the shields failed completely. If the alien could arrive before then, thousands of lives might be saved. If they could not, activating the beacon would only make the Krail focus their attack. "Do it," Colonel Hayes said. "We are dead anyway if we just sit here. At least this gives us a chance." She assigned Jake a small team. Corporal Danny Chen would handle communications. Lieutenant Lisa Parker was their best engineer. Sergeant Henry Blake had more combat experience than anyone else in the colony. Together, they had to reach the crash site and activate the beacon. The journey across the desert was like traveling through hell. The sky was filled with fire as Krail ships continued their bombardment. Buildings collapsed in the distance. Smoke turned the red sand black. Jake drove the vehicle while Lisa worked on preparing tools to extract the beacon from the pod. Vela sat in the back, giving directions in her improving English. They reached the crash site and found it partially destroyed by nearby explosions. The escape pod was still intact, but barely. Lisa and Danny worked together to access the core computer, while Henry set up a defensive perimeter. Vela guided them through the alien technology, her small hands moving with surprising confidence. The beacon was different from anything Jake had seen. It looked like a crystal that glowed with inner light, pulsing in a rhythm that seemed almost alive. Vela explained that it would broadcast on frequencies that only essence-based technology could detect. The alien would hear it across vast distances. Unfortunately, so would the Krail. Danny boosted the signal using the colony's communication array, which he accessed remotely. Lisa connected power cells to extend the beacon's range. Vela placed her hand on the crystal and spoke words in her language that sounded like a prayer. The crystal blazed with light so bright that Jake had to look away. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the bombardment shifted. Every Krail ship in orbit suddenly focused their weapons on the crash site. Henry shouted for everyone to take cover as the ground around them exploded. Energy blasts turned sand to glass. The air became so hot that Jake felt his skin burning. Henry returned fire with his rifle, knowing it was useless but buying them seconds. Krail ground units approached, machines on spider-like legs that moved with terrible speed. Henry stood his ground, protecting the others while they disconnected the beacon. Jake saw him fall, saw the machines advancing, and knew they were out of time. Jake grabbed Vela and ran for the vehicle. Lisa and Danny provided covering fire as they retreated. The beacon was still transmitting, still calling across the stars. Jake did not know if anyone would answer. He only knew they had to survive long enough to find out. They were halfway back to the colony when the sky split open. It was the only way Jake could describe it. Space itself seemed to tear apart, and through the tear came 3 ships larger than anything he had ever imagined. They were beautiful, flowing designs that looked like art rather than weapons. Their hulls glowed with the same light as Vela's beacon. The alien warships moved with impossible grace. Weapons that Jake could not understand reached out across space and touched the Krail fleet. Black ships simply disappeared, torn apart at the molecular level. The battle was over in minutes. The Krail tried to retreat, but the alien ships were faster. Nothing escaped. Jake stopped the vehicle and watched in amazement. Beside him, Vela was crying again, but these were different tears. She whispered in her language, words that Danny translated through his computer. They came, they heard me. They came. The alien ships began rescue operations immediately. Smaller craft descended to the colony, carrying medical teams and equipment. They saved people trapped in collapsed buildings. They stabilized the wounded. They moved with efficiency that spoke of long practice, as if they had done this many times before. A shuttle landed near Jake's vehicle. The door opened, and a tall alien male stepped out. He wore armor that seemed to blend metal and light. His face was stern but showed relief when he saw Vela. He spoke to her in their language, and she responded quickly, gesturing toward Jake and his team. The alien male approached Jake and spoke through a translation device. I am Admiral Kalen. You protected Princess Vela when she had no one. The alien people owe you a debt that can never be fully repaid. Jake did not know what to say. He just looked at Vela, this small girl who was apparently a princess, and realized that giving her a chocolate bar had somehow changed everything. As the ship approached the alien homeworld, Jake stood at the observation window with his team. The planet called Aloria appeared before them, and it took his breath away. Floating islands supported by essence technology dotted the atmosphere. Crystal cities reflected sunlight in rainbow patterns. Gardens filled with bioluminescent plants created landscapes of living light. But Jake also saw the signs of war. Military vessels filled the orbital space. Defensive platforms surrounded the planet like a steel shell. Refugee ships from destroyed worlds crowded the outer stations. This was a civilization under siege, fighting for its survival. The beauty could not hide the desperation underneath. The ship descended through the atmosphere toward the royal palace. Jake touched the essence crystal at his neck and thought about the chocolate bay. The aliens spent 3 days helping New Haven colony recover. Their medical technology healed injuries that human doctors said were permanent. Their construction equipment rebuilt damaged structures in hours instead of months. They shared food and supplies freely, asking nothing in return. The colonists watched in amazement as this advanced civilization treated them not as primitives, but as equals. Jake spent most of that time being debriefed by both human and alien officials. Everyone wanted to know every detail of how he found Vela, how he cared for her, and how they managed to activate the beacon. He told the story so many times that it started to feel unreal, like something that had happened to someone else. Admiral Kalen explained the situation to Colonel Hayes and her staff. The Krail were machine intelligences that had been consuming civilizations for decades. The alien had been fighting them for 20 years, winning some battles but slowly losing the war. 17 alien worlds had fallen. Millions had died. The war showed no sign of ending. Humanity had been lucky, Kalen said. The Krail had not discovered Earth yet, but that luck would not last forever. The machines spread through the galaxy like a disease, destroying everything in their path. If the Aelin fell, the Krail would eventually reach human space. It might take 10 years or 50, but it would happen. Jake saw Vela several times during those 3 days, but always from a distance. She was surrounded by Aelin officials, guards, and advisors. She wore elegant robes now instead of medical gowns. Her hair was styled in complex patterns that must have taken hours to create. She looked like a princess, not the frightened child from the crash site. On the morning of the 4th day, the Aelin prepared to leave. Their ships were ready, and Vela had to return to her people. Jake stood with the other colonists, watching the preparations. He felt strange, like he was saying goodbye to a relative he had only just met. He hoped Vela would have a good life, that she would recover from her trauma and find happiness. Vela appeared at the shuttle boarding area, walking with Admiral Kalen. She stopped suddenly and said something to him. The Admiral looked surprised but nodded. Vela walked away from her escorts and came directly to Jake. The crowd of colonists stepped back, giving them space. She looked up at Jake with those violet eyes and spoke in English that was now nearly perfect. "I need to tell you something important. When you gave me food, you created a bond in my culture. We call it the Covenant of Sustenance. It is one of our most sacred connections. You became my guardian, and I became yours. We are bound now, unto death." Jake did not fully understand what she meant. He tried to explain that he had just been helping, that anyone would have done the same thing. Vela shook her head gently. "No. Most people would have been afraid. Most would have kept the food for themselves. You saw past my alien appearance and recognized my need. That is rare and precious." She reached into her robe and pulled out a small crystal on a chain. It glowed softly with inner light. "This is a piece of essence crystal. It is linked to me. If you ever need help, if you are ever in danger, hold this and call my name. I will hear you across any distance, and I will come." She placed the chain around Jake's neck. Jake wanted to refuse such a valuable gift, but he could see how important this was to Vela. He accepted it with a simple thank you. Vela smiled, and for a moment she looked like the child from the crash site again. "I will see you again, Jake Morrison. This I promise." Then she returned to Admiral Kalen, and moments later the shuttle lifted into the sky. Jake watched the Aelin ships disappear into space. He touched the crystal at his neck and wondered what he had gotten himself into. The weeks that followed brought massive changes to the colony and to Earth. First contact with an advanced alien. Civilization changed everything about how humanity viewed the universe and their place in it. Earth's government created new departments and agencies to handle relations with the Aelin. The Xeno-Diplomacy Corps was established with emergency funding. Military budgets increased as humanity realized they were living in a dangerous galaxy. Scientists scrambled to understand the basics of essence technology. Jake was promoted to captain and reassigned to the Xeno-Diplomacy Corps. His experience with Vela made him valuable to officials who had never met an alien. He was flown to Earth for training and briefings. He met with politicians, scientists, and military leaders, all asking the same questions over and over. The work was important, but frustrating. Jake was a soldier, not a diplomat. He understood supply chains and military operations, not political negotiations and cultural protocols. He spent his days in meetings and his nights writing reports. He missed the simplicity of life on Kepler 442, even with all its hardships. Communication with the Aelin was limited. They were fighting a war and had little time for cultural exchange. Jake received occasional messages from Vela, simple notes thanking him again and telling him she was well. They felt formal, probably written by advisors. He wondered if she even remembered the personal connection they had shared. 6 months passed. Jake settled into his new role, training diplomats on what he knew about Aelin culture and helping develop protocols for future contact. He kept the essence crystal hidden under his uniform. Sometimes at night he would hold it and wonder if Vela was safe, if she was happy, if she had recovered from her trauma. Then everything changed again. An Aelin diplomatic ship arrived at Earth without warning. Admiral Kalen himself came to the surface and requested a private meeting with Earth's leaders. Jake was called in as the human with the most Aelin contact experience. He arrived at the conference room to find Kalen looking troubled. The admiral explained that Princess Vela had invoked an ancient rite. She was being prepared for her role as the last heir to the Aelan throne. This involved complex training and ceremonies. As part of this process, she had the right to name advisors and companions who would serve in her royal household. She had named Jake Morrison. The room erupted in questions. Kalen raised his hand for silence. He explained that this was unprecedented. No alien had ever been named to an Aelan royal household. Some on the High Council opposed it strongly, but Vela had invoked the Covenant of Sustenance, and under Aelan law, this could not be refused. She requested that Jake come to the Aelan homeworld as her personal guest. Jake felt like the room was spinning. This was beyond anything he had imagined. Earth's leaders saw opportunity mixed with danger. This could be a diplomatic breakthrough, a chance to learn about Aelan society from the inside. It could also be a trap or a political manipulation. They argued for hours about how to respond. Finally, they decided to accept, but with conditions. Jake would not go alone. He would have a small team of human specialists who could learn and report back to Earth. This team would include Dr. Lisa Chang, a brilliant xenobiologist who could study Aelan life. Commander Alex Torres would provide military analysis. Rachel Green, a cultural anthropologist, would document everything about Aelan society. Jake met his team over the next few days. Lisa was excited about the opportunity to study alien biology firsthand. Alex was cautious, seeing potential military intelligence value. Rachel was thrilled to observe an alien culture. They all understood the stakes. They would be representing humanity on an alien world, surrounded by a civilization far more advanced than their own. Jake called his sister Katie before leaving. She was proud of him but worried. She reminded him that he had always been the kind of person who helped others without thinking about the consequences. That quality had served him well so far, but alien politics might be more dangerous than he realized. Jake promised to be careful. The Aelan ship was unlike anything Jake had experienced. The interior looked organic, with flowing curves and surfaces that seemed alive. His quarters were comfortable but alien, designed for Aelan proportions and aesthetics. The journey to the Aelan homeworld would take 2 weeks using their faster-than-light drive. During the journey, Admiral Kalen spent time teaching the human team about Aelan culture. He explained their history, their values, and the complexity of their current situation. The Aelan had been a proud and peaceful people. The war with the Krail had changed them, forced them to become warriors when they preferred to be artists and philosophers. Kalen also explained the political situation Jake was entering. The High Council was divided between those who saw humans as potential allies and those who viewed them as primitives who happened to stumble into something beyond their understanding. Vela's decision to bring Jake into the royal household had intensified these divisions. The royal palace was more magnificent than anything Jake had seen in pictures or imagination. Towers of crystalline light rose from a floating island, surrounded by gardens that defied physics. Water flowed upward in some places, creating fountains that seemed to touch the sky. The air itself felt different here, charged with energy that made his skin tingle. Palace staff met them at the landing platform. They wore elegant robes in shades of blue and silver, moving with grace that suggested long practice in formal protocols. Jake and his team were led through halls decorated with art that seemed to shift and change as they walked past. Rachel whispered that she could spend years just studying the architecture. They were brought to a large reception room with windows overlooking the city below. Admiral Kalen told them to wait while he announced their arrival. Jake stood by the window, watching flying vehicles move between the floating islands. Lisa examined everything with scientific curiosity. Alex assessed security measures and exit routes. Rachel recorded observations on her tablet. Then Vela entered the room and Jake almost did not recognize her. She wore robes of deep purple embedded with technology that created patterns of light across the fabric. Her hair was arranged in intricate braids decorated with crystals. She carried herself with regal bearing, her back straight and her movements precise. This was not the frightened child from the crash site, but when she saw Jake, her formal mask cracked. A genuine smile spread across her face and she walked quickly toward him. For a moment she looked like she might run and embrace him, but she caught herself and maintained proper composure. Jake Morrison, she said in perfect English. You came. I knew you would come. Jake bowed awkwardly, not sure of the proper protocol. Vela laughed, a sound that reminded him of the girl who had eaten chocolate with tears running down her face. Please do not bow to me when we are alone. You are my guardian. We are beyond such formalities. She gestured for everyone to sit, and servants brought refreshments that looked beautiful but unfamiliar. Over the next few hours, Vela explained the situation Jake had entered. The Aelin High Council governed the Empire during the crisis caused by the royal family's death. Vela was being prepared to take the throne when she came of age in 2 years. Until then, she attended council meetings and learned statecraft, but she had limited actual power. The council was divided on many issues, but especially on how to handle relations with humanity. Chancellor Soren led the conservative faction. He believed humans were too primitive to be useful allies and that associating with them would damage Aelin prestige. Admiral Kalen led the progressive faction, arguing that fresh perspectives might help break the strategic stalemate with the Krail. Vela's decision to invoke the Covenant and bring Jake to the palace had become a political issue. Some saw it as proof that she was too young and emotional to lead. Others saw it as evidence of wisdom beyond her years, recognizing value where others saw only differences. The debate had grown heated in recent weeks. Jake asked the question that had been bothering him since Kalen's visit to Earth. Why had Vela really brought him here? She looked at him seriously and said she needed someone she could trust completely. The palace was full of advisors and officials, all with their own agendas. Jake had helped her when she had nothing to offer in return. That made him unique. The following days brought Jake into the complex world of Aelin politics. He attended council meetings as Vela's designated advisor, though he understood only a fraction of what was discussed. The translation technology helped with language but could not explain cultural references or historical context. He mostly stayed quiet and observed. Chancellor Soren made his displeasure clear from the start. During one meeting, he openly questioned why a primitive from a species that had barely left their own solar system was sitting in on strategic discussions. Admiral Kalen defended Jake's presence, pointing out that humans had successfully protected the princess when the entire Aelin military had failed to find her. Jake's team worked to learn as much as possible. Lisa studied Aelin biology and medicine with palace doctors. Alex observed military operations and fleet deployments. Rachel documented social customs and cultural practices. They met regularly to share information and write reports for Earth. Everything they learned reinforced how desperate the Aelin situation had become. The war briefings were the most troubling. The Krail had destroyed 37 Aelin worlds in 20 years. They were machine intelligences that could replicate endlessly, learning and adapting with each battle. The Aelin had superior technology, but they were biological beings with limited numbers. Every loss was permanent. Every victory came at a cost they could not sustain. During one briefing, Jake noticed a pattern in the Krail tactics. They were highly efficient but predictable. They optimized and adapted but never truly innovated. The Aelin fought with honor and strategic doctrine, and the Krail had learned to counter those approaches. It was like watching two chess players who had memorized each other's moves. Jake spoke up during the meeting, something he had not done before. He suggested that the Aelin might be too focused on fighting the way they always had. The Krail adapted to patterns. What if the Aelin broke the patterns entirely? Use unpredictable tactics, asymmetric warfare, strategies that did not follow any logical optimization? The room went silent. Chancellor Soren looked offended. You suggest we abandon thousands of years of military doctrine to fight like barbarians. Admiral Kalen, however, looked thoughtful. He asked Jake to explain further. Jake talked about guerrilla warfare, feints and deceptions, intentionally inefficient tactics that would confuse an enemy expecting optimization. The council debated for hours. Some thought Jake's ideas were brilliant. Others thought they were insulting. Vela listened quietly, then spoke with authority that surprised everyone. She said they should test these ideas. If they worked, it could change the war. If they failed, they would have lost only a small force. The council reluctantly agreed to consider it. Admiral Kalen proposed a joint operation. A human and Aelin force would attack a Krail forward base using Jake's suggested tactics. If successful, it would prove the value of this approach and strengthen the alliance between their peoples. If it failed, well, At least they would have tried something new. The council approved the mission after extensive debate. Jake spent weeks working with Aelin military planners. Alex helped translate human tactical concepts into terms the Aelin could understand. They developed a strike plan that would have horrified traditional military strategists. It involved feints, retreats, attacks from unexpected angles, and deliberately wasteful maneuvers designed to confuse rather than optimize. Jake also spent time with Vela when she could escape her royal duties. They walked in the palace gardens, talking about everything and nothing. She told him about her nightmares, which still came every night. She dreamed about her mother's face as the palace fell. She dreamed about floating in the escape pod, starving and alone. She dreamed about dying before anyone found her. Jake listened and offered what comfort he could. He told her that trauma did not disappear just because you were safe now. He shared his own struggles adjusting to his new role, feeling out of place among politicians and diplomats. They were both people thrust into positions they never expected, trying to carry weights that seemed too heavy. One evening, Vela asked Jake a difficult question. People say I am strong because I survived, but I only survived because my mother died for me. How can I be strong when everything I have is built on someone else's sacrifice? Jake thought carefully before answering. He said strength was not about never needing help. It was about accepting help when offered, and then using that gift to help others in turn. As the planned operation approached, intelligence reports brought dire news. The Krail had identified Eloria's location. A massive assault fleet was being assembled in a nearby system. The Aelin had months at best before the final battle for their homeworld. The upcoming mission suddenly carried even more weight. They needed to prove that new tactics could work before the main assault arrived. Jake requested to go on the mission personally. Alex argued against it, saying Jake was too valuable to risk. But Jake insisted. He had proposed these tactics. He needed to see if they worked in actual combat. Vela supported his decision, though Jake could see the worry in her eyes. She made him promise to come back safely. The joint human-Aelin task force assembled in orbit. 3 Aelin warships accompanied by a dozen smaller human vessels. The humans were outmatched in technology, but would provide the unpredictability that was central to the plan. Danny Chen joined the mission as communications specialist, his experience from the beacon operation making him valuable. Before departure, Vela came to see Jake in the hangar. She gave him a new essence crystal stronger than the first. She spoke formally, but Jake could hear the emotion underneath. You are my guardian, Jake Morrison, by law and by love. Return to me safely. He promised he would try. She touched his hand briefly, then left quickly before anyone could see her tears. The fleet launched into faster-than-light travel. Jake sat in the command center of the Aelin flagship, watching star charts and tactical displays he barely understood. Admiral Kalen stood beside him, looking confident despite the risks. The battle lasted 3 hours and cost 17 lives. The Krail forward base was destroyed, but the price had been higher than Jake hoped. He stood in the medical bay, watching doctors work on wounded soldiers from both species. Danny had taken shrapnel from an exploding console. He would survive, but the injury was serious. Jake felt the weight of every casualty, but the mission was tactically successful. The Krail had been confused by the unpredictable tactics. Their adaptation algorithms had struggled to find patterns. The joint force had proven that human and Aelin ships could work together effectively. Admiral Kalen called it a victory that might change the course of the war. Jake called it a bloody lesson in the cost of innovation. When they returned to Eloria, the High Council met in emergency session. Reports from the battle were analyzed in detail. Even Chancellor Soren had to admit that the tactics had worked better than expected. The Council voted to expand the Human-Aelin alliance and integrate these new approaches into their military doctrine. It was a political victory as well as a military one. Earth's government received the news with mixed feelings. The success meant opportunity but also commitment. Humanity would be drawn deeper into a galactic war. After intense debate and consultation with military advisors, Earth's leadership voted to enter a formal alliance with the Aelin sovereignty. The decision was not unanimous, but it passed. 2 civilizations were now bound together. The Treaty of Two Worlds was signed aboard an Aelin flagship in orbit around Earth's moon. Jake stood beside Valor as official witnesses. He watched human and Aelin leaders sign documents that would commit both peoples to mutual defense. It felt surreal, like watching history happen in fast motion. A chocolate bar had somehow led to this moment, but there was no time to celebrate. The Krail assault fleet arrived at the Aelin home system 2 weeks later, months earlier than predicted. Thousands of black ships emerged from faster-than-light travel, forming attack patterns that stretched across space. The combined human-Aelin fleet moved to intercept them in the system's outer reaches, buying time for civilian evacuations. The battle that followed made the forward base operation look like a small skirmish. It lasted for days, a grinding test of endurance that pushed both sides to their limits. Jake coordinated guerrilla strikes using human ships as fast attack elements. The tactics worked, but the Krail adapted quickly. Wave after wave of machine ships pressed forward, learning from each engagement. Losses mounted on both sides. Ships were destroyed. Soldiers died. Jake watched the casualty reports climb and felt sick. He had helped start this. His ideas about unpredictable tactics had brought humanity into this war. Now people were dying because of choices he had influenced. The weight of responsibility was crushing. On the 5th day of battle, as the defensive lines began to crumble, Vela called an emergency council meeting. She stood before the assembled leaders and revealed something she had kept secret. She knew the location of the last Essence Vault, a repository of ancient Aelin technology hidden in another dimension. The vault contained enough power to hold the Krail indefinitely, but accessing the vault required a terrible sacrifice. Someone with royal blood had to enter and bind themselves to it permanently. They would become a living conduit for the essence, aware but isolated, trapped forever in another dimension. They would power the defenses for potentially thousands of years, unable to leave or truly live. Vela announced her decision to enter the vault. The council erupted in protest. Chancellor Soren argued they should find another way. Admiral Kalen said she was too valuable to lose. But Vela was calm and firm. Her family had died so she could survive. Now she would survive in a different way, protecting the worlds her family had loved. There was no time for alternatives. Jake listened to this and felt something break inside. He had not saved Vela from starvation only to watch her sacrifice herself like this. He pulled Dr. Lisa Chang aside and asked if there was any other option. Lisa had been studying essence technology for months. She said there might be a way to share the burden among multiple people, creating a network that distributed the strain. The idea was untested and dangerous. If the network failed, everyone connected might die. But if it worked, they could create shifts that allowed each person to maintain consciousness and eventually be relieved. Instead of one person trapped forever, it would be many people serving temporary terms. Lisa could not guarantee it would work, but it was a chance. Jake brought the proposal to the council. They were skeptical, but volunteers stepped forward immediately. Admiral Kalen offered to serve. Lisa volunteered despite being human and never having used essence before. Dozens of Aelin warriors came forward. Human soldiers who had fought beside them joined. They would all share the burden together. Vela tried to refuse their help. This was her responsibility, her sacrifice to make. But Jake reminded her of what she had said about the Covenant. They were bound to protect each other. That meant sharing burdens, not watching one person carry everything alone. If she went into the vault, he was going with her. That was not negotiable. They had hours before the Krail would breach the planet's orbit. The gateway to the vault was activated in the deepest chamber of the royal palace. It opened like a tear in reality, showing a space beyond normal physics. Crystal structures floated in streams of pure energy. The sight was beautiful and terrifying. This was where they would bind themselves. The first group entered together. Vela and Jake, Admiral Kalen and Lisa, and 10 others willing to be pioneers. The moment they crossed the threshold, Jake felt his consciousness expand. He could sense the others, their thoughts and feelings bleeding into his. He could feel the essence itself, raw power waiting to be channeled. It was overwhelming and agonizing. Vela guided them through the binding process using knowledge inherited through her royal blood. They formed a network, each person a node connecting to the others. The pain was intense as their minds adapted to this new state. Jake felt like he was being pulled apart and rebuilt, but slowly they stabilized. The network held. They were connected now in ways that went beyond normal understanding. Together they channeled the essence outward. Above Aloria, shields of solid light appeared, enveloping the planet and surrounding moons. The Krail assault crashed against these defenses like waves against stone. Their weapons could not penetrate. Their ships could not break through. The tide of the battle turned in an instant. Jake existed in two places at once. Part of him was in the vault, maintaining the defensive network. Part of him could sense everything the shields touched. He felt ships bouncing off the barriers. He felt the frustration of the Krail as they tried and failed to adapt. It was strange and exhausting, but it worked. The planet was safe. Time moved differently in the vault. 6 months passed before Jake completed his first shift and was rotated out. When he emerged back into normal reality, his body was weak and his mind felt stretched. But he was alive and conscious. The rotation system worked. He had served his time, and now others would take his place in the network. The war had changed during those 6 months. Unable to break the shields around Aloria, the Krail had begun a slow retreat. The combined human-alien forces pressed their advantage, using the new tactics to strike at Krail positions across multiple systems. Victory was not certain, but for the first time it seemed possible. The tide was turning. Jake returned to Earth on leave. He was celebrated as a hero of the Alliance, the human who had helped save an alien civilization. Politicians wanted to meet him. Media outlets wanted interviews. He found it all overwhelming and slightly ridiculous. He had just been trying to help a scared, hungry kid. Everything else had followed from that. His sister Katie interviewed him for her news outlet. She asked if he regretted giving Vela that chocolate bar, knowing where it would lead. Jake thought carefully about the question. He thought about the battles, the deaths, the weight of responsibility. Then he said no. He would do it again. Because it was not about changing the galaxy. It was about helping one person when they needed it. Years passed. Jake served multiple shifts in the vault, each time learning to handle the strain better. The war continued but gradually moved in the Alliance's favor. The Krail were contained in a quarantine zone, surrounded and unable to expand further. New worlds joined the Alliance as news spread of the cooperation between humans and Aelin. Jake maintained his connection with Vela through the years. She matured into her role as princess and leader, respected for her wisdom and courage. The bond between them remained strong, deeper than friendship because of their shared time in the Vault network. They had touched minds in ways that created understanding beyond words. During one of Vela's off-shifts from the Vault, they walked together in the palace gardens. She was older now, carrying herself with confidence that came from experience rather than training. They talked about the early days, about the crash site and the chocolate bar. Vela said it had become a teaching story among her people, a parable about kindness across divides. Jake joked that it seemed silly to make such a big deal about a candy bar. Vela shook her head and explained. It was never about the chocolate itself. It was about recognition. You saw past my alien appearance and recognized my need.